Welcome to 2 Bits in 2 Minutes this morning. Have you ever felt chained or shackled, that you were in bondage, that you were taken captive? Man, what a horrible feeling. But that's exactly where we are if we are in sin. We are chained and we are in bondage to sin if we are living a life that is not pleasing to God and living a life that is sinful. But what about the thought of freedom? What about the thought of being liberated? What about the thought that Paul gives us in Romans chapter 6, that we can loose the bonds of sin? We can be free in respect to Christ. Notice in Romans chapter 6, Paul tells us exactly how to remove ourselves and get out of sin and become a free man. He says, shall you continue in sin that grace may abound? And he says, well, no, of course not. Don't you know that if you've been baptized into Christ, you've been baptized into His death, burial, and His resurrection, and you've been made in the newness of Christ? And then notice in verse 7, when it talks about this death, this baptism, this burial that we've taken with Christ, it says this, for he who has died has what? Been freed from sin. The thought of freedom, the thought of liberty, the thought of being in Christ takes us away from the bondage and the captivity of sin. Then drop down to verse 18 of the same chapter, and he says, and having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. No longer are we captive to sin, but rather we are slaves unto God, and we are serving Him in righteousness. And then drop down to verse 22. And now having been set free from sin, and having become slaves of God, you have your fruit to holiness, to the end of everlasting life. Friends, today I want you to think about the word freedom. Not being captive and being held in chains to sin, but rather being made free in Christ Jesus. I hope that God will bless you richly today, and I hope that you will continue to serve Him with all of your might, and you leave sin to the side. Thanks for joining me for 2 Bits in 2 Minutes. Have a great day.